Hello, today we'll talk about part four of COMM 303, Business and Professionalism. Specifically, we will talk about Chapter 8, Chapter 9, and Chapter 10. And your assignments will correspond with Chapter 8, and you'll actually go back to a previous chapter for a part of your assignment. I'll talk about that later. So to start with chapter 8, we're talking about technology in the workplace. And I love talking about this stuff because this is more in line with my expertise as a scholar. So we have this thing called computer mediated communication. This is where people use communication technology to communicate with each other. And it's different than face-to-face communication. So even though we might see each other's faces via Zoom or FaceTime or something like that, it's still computer mediated communication because we're using a communication technology in order to communicate. So the idea in the workplace using CMC, I'll often refer to it as CMC also instead of computer mediated communication, because just like now I get caught up with my words there. But computer mediated communication in the workplace often looks like virtual teams or using technologies like Google Meets or Slack or Zoom or email or texting or all of those other platforms. All of that is a mediated channel. So depending on the workplace will depend on what technology you use to communicate. For example, if you're communicating with your teachers, you're likely using email for your primary channel for communication. I had mentioned earlier on in this term, in my introduction video, I'm a yoga teacher at a studio in Morgantown. And for the mediated channel that we use to communicate with each other there, we use Slack. We used to use WhatsApp. And that way we have this continuous thread of each member and their contributions to the conversation. It's important though, and this is a good segue into like how to stay professional in these organizational mediated channels. It's important to stay professional on those workplace channels to communicate. So sometimes that gets a little bit lost because where we use different channels for different types of communication, like formal versus informal. If we use more informal channels, it gives us more room to communicate with maybe less professional language, or we might share a meme that we think everybody else will think is funny when in fact not everybody else thinks it's funny. It's important to consider what communication you use via these channels during which situation. And later we'll talk about situational leadership and things like that. But there's this thing I want to briefly talk about called context collapse, and it's relevant to your social media. And I put socials there because that's what many people refer to social media as, because there's so many different platforms. But context collapse and its relevance to social media is basically this idea that you have multiple circles of people, including your work, quote, family, your colleagues, your real, quote, real family, end quote, your friends on the same platform, on the same social media platform. So you might follow your supervisor and they might follow you back on, for example, Instagram. So when you post a picture that you think you're posting for your friends, just make sure you remember that other people have access to that information. It's always a good idea to stay professional on your social media platforms, and different social media platforms like LinkedIn, they lend themselves to more professional communication, whereas social media platforms like Instagram lend themselves more to more informal or less professional ways of communicating. But still, especially when you're on the job market, you want to keep your social media content as professional as possible. For example, don't post pictures of you going out and partying the weekend before, or don't post pictures or memes that are necessarily political in nature, unless, for example, you're going to get a job or you want to get a job for a political affiliation and you want that to be the highlight, right? So if it's relevant, then go ahead and post it. So all of this is related to that computer mediated communication, and these are tools that we can use to show our professional excellence in the workplace. We'll talk about emails, and I'll go over your assignment here in these next few PowerPoints, but I'll stop this just as to give us a little cognitive break from content.